The U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, while in Saudi Arabia, has made some controversial comments on Iran and also on Iraq. He said that it was time for, quote, the Iranian-backed militias in Iraq to go home. Well, in this edition of the debate, we'll discuss U.S. aspirations to pull Iraq away from Iran, look at why the U.S. and its allies keep accusing Iran of exerting its regional influence. We'll also ask who are the Iraqi Popular Mobilization Forces and what is the Saudi-Iraqi Coordination Council.
The U.S. Secretary of State has caused a stir in Iraq by demanding that the country's Popular Mobilization Forces go home. Rex Tillerson made the remarks in the Saudi capital, Riyadh.
Iranian militias that are in Iraq, now that the fight against Daesh and ISIS is coming to a close, those militias need to go home. Any foreign fighters in Iraq need to go home.
The remarks quickly drew fire from Baghdad. The statement by Iraqi Prime Minister al-Abadi said no party has the right to interfere in Iraq's domestic matters. The words "go home" also drew widespread ridicule. The PMF is made up of Iraqi citizens, and in November 2016, the country's parliament voted in favor of granting them full legal status with equal rights as a regular army. The law stipulates that the forces is led by Iraq's commander-in-chief, Prime Minister al-Abadi. Many observers are left scratching their heads and questioning where they should now go home to. Washington and its regional allies regularly single out the popular mobilization units in Iraq. They portray the volunteer force as a Shia entity, creating sectarian strife against Iraq's Sunni Muslims. But there are more Shia enlisted in the country's army than Sunnis, while there are more Sunnis fighting for the PMF than there are with the army.
This desire that Washington has to reduce everything that happens in the Middle East, and in particular Iraq here, to reduce the narrative back to a binary of sectarianism. We need to be careful here not to go back to kind of pre-Daesh. It has nothing to do with Sunni or Shia here. It has everything to do with geopolitics.
PMF also has Christian, Yazidi, and Turkmen units. Iran has been supporting Iraq's war on Daesh Takfiri terrorists. In the same line, Tehran has also been supporting the Kurdish Peshmerga in their fight against Daesh. Government officials in Erbil and Baghdad say both capitals would have collapsed to the terrorists had it not been for Iran's help. Since Daesh launched an offensive in Iraq back in the summer of 2014, scenes like this have been witnessed on almost daily basis, which show the sacrifice that popular forces have made while fighting Daesh. Iraqi officials say the PMF have been the most effective force battling the terrorists and have sacrificed the most fighters. The popular mobilization are not just popular in name, they are extremely popular among Iraqis, with their leaders saying they have sacrificed their blood for the country and the region. Some observers and countries accuse Washington, Israel, and the regional allies of colluding with the Takfiri group and argue this may explain why they are so outspoken against the force defeating it.
Our guest joining us for this edition of the debate, State of the Law Coalition, Asad Abu Talib joins us from Baghdad, and Congressional Defense Policy Advisor Frederick Peterson joins us from New York. Gentlemen, welcome. Asad Abu Talib, let me start with you and talk about this meeting that happened in Saudi Arabia. First of all, why do you think that the U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson would press Saudi Arabia to deepen its ties with Baghdad?
Well, thank you very much. Actually, the remarks of Mr. Tillerson were both a surprise and a shock to us here in Baghdad. I mean, the whole thing was, the idea was for the Prime Minister to go to Saudi Arabia with the presence of the U.S. Secretary of State to discuss the peaceful expansion of the relationship between the two countries and to have a new beginning. But raising this issue of the PMUs was a big surprise, and accusing the Iraqis of being sectarian and Shia. Well, I mean, I don't know how we can remove 65% of the Iraqi population and to tell them to go where, unless the Americans want to host 25 million Iraqi Shia, then probably that would be a good solution. But to ask the Shia to leave Iraq I think that is very unfair, very unjust, and very unwise decision or statement by the American foreign minister. He should have had the facts, first of all, been explained to him, and then ask the Shia to leave Iraq. This is one issue. The other issue is that this supposed to be we're supposed to present our gratitude to the people of Iraq, Sunni, Shia, Kurds, Turkmen, Christians, Muslims, everybody here for the tremendous victory they had over ISIS. And the world should be grateful to the sacrifices that the Iraqi nation have provided on behalf of the world in defeating and destroying ISIS and Daesh here in Iraq.
Well, you heard our guest there, Peter Peterson from Baghdad. You can see the perception and the impression that not only he has had based on the statements made by Rex Tillerson, but also a lot of other Iraqis. Your reaction?
I really don't understand who speaks.
No, this is
like
for Frederick Peterson, Asad Abu Talib. Sorry, go ahead, Frederick Peterson.
Okay, are we all set?
Yes, we are.
All right, we have to look at this situation as being a very, very fluid situation indeed, and yet there are signs of optimism here. We have, with a coalition within Iraq, defeated a common enemy. That enemy was defeated with fighters of each of the groups within Iraq, and with help from Iran, actually, and with some help from Saudi Arabia. What happens now is, this being a very fluid situation, there are other motives. Each of the components of that, including the Kurds, a third component here, have mixed objectives as to what to do with the victory now that the victory is, the war is certainly not over, but there have been very significant progress because of the alliances of these disparate groups. There is an opportunity here to eschew or to turn our backs on the outside competing interests within Iraq and to find a way to bring Iraq back together again, although recognizing the historic fact that Iraq has been glued together by colonial powers a long time ago, taking disparate parts and trying to make a unified whole. So there is a dynamic contention within Iraq always. There's Sunni, Shia, Kurd, other minority groups within the country that are going to have to put their own interests aside and come together, if they choose, as a country, and eschew the influence of outside forces, be it either from Saudi, be it from Iran, be it from other forces within the region or outside the region, that are looking to use Iraq as a playground of policy. I would encourage that the Secretary and the President is right in that what we need to do is we need to find a way to cool down the situation and let Iraq be Iraq, not let Iraq be unduly influenced or controlled or dominated by any of the component parts or outside forces.
Okay. Asad Abu Talib, our guest there says we should let Iraq be Iraq. I'm not too sure how then that can actually happen when you have the U.S. Secretary of State say, quote, these fighters need to go home. Any foreign fighters need to go home. And he talked about the Iranian-backed militias and their Iranian advisors. In essence, when he says foreign fighters need to go home, isn't he shooting himself in the foot? Because the last time I checked, there were U.S. soldiers on the ground in Iraq.
There are 5,000 of them. There are 5,000 American troops in Iraq presently. There are British troops, and there are Australian troops and French, and they're all doing a wonderful job in helping training the Iraqi troops. And I think they are valuable guests here in Iraq. If he wants to send them away, then that is his problem. We don't work on orders by Mr. Tillerson. We have our regional countries that the position or the situation that Iran has helped us in the past few years was unprecedented and was extremely helpful. Without, even in the latest problem we had with Kurdistan, if it wasn't for some Iranian commanders, we would have had war now with the Peshmerga. General Soleimani, who had a very important role quietening and finding a peaceful solution to the present problem. So I really don't know what Mr. Tillerson is talking about. He could be speaking to please or to appease the Saudi backers, financial backers. Maybe that's what he was talking about. Maybe the appeasement of the Saudis was more valuable, more important for the Americans than to have a better, truthful, straightforward relationship with the state of united Iraq.
Frederick Peterson, you know, there's terminology that's being used,
yes,
and I'd like to understand from you why this is happening, and that's the description of these volunteer forces that they name Iranian-backed militias. Now, let me ask you something, Frederick Peterson. Do you know what Iraq's popular mobilization units, who they are, who they're comprised of?
Well, yes, they are. There are, in fact, a majority are Shia. And those Shia are, I mean, this is a complicated picture. This is not a simple puzzle that we can put together. It has moving parts.
No, but this is important. You need to clarify that. The people think that there's Iranian soldiers on the ground that are attacked, yes, Kurdistan, Iraqi Kurdistan. That's the perception in the most recent tensions that arose. I'd like for you to tell us what this popular mobilization units, who they're comprised of.
Most of them are comprised of Iraqis that are a component part of the Iraqi army, and yet, or members of militias that are strongly influenced by Iran. What I think the Secretary is saying is that what they should do is join the Iraqi army, not be a member of an independent, quasi-independent militia movement that is another moving force within the country that is going to have to be dealt with, that is armed, that is capable, that is supported by a regional power, and that becomes not a glue to Iranian cohesion, but becomes something that is going to split it apart.
Well, you gave us that definition. Thank you for that. Let me ask Saddam Abu Talib the same question. I'm sorry. Saddam Abu Talib, the same question to you, please.
I mean, sometimes I am surprised, and in this case, I'm utterly surprised. PMUs, they have a law passed by the parliament that dictated that all PMUs are part of the Iraqi armed forces. They are under the control of the chief in command. They cannot move without the approval of the Iraqi Ministry of Defense. They cannot arm themselves outside the Iraqi Ministry of Defense. They move on the orders of the Prime Minister, and they have never entered a battle without the approval of the Joint Chief of Staff. So to call them militias, I think that is quite unfair. Maybe in the beginning there were a group of people who rose to fight ISIS after the historic fatwa of Imam Sistani. But last year a law was passed by the parliament to include all PMUs within the Iraqi army, and as such they are an integral part of the Iraqi army and an official fighting force that take orders only from the office of the Iraqi Prime Minister.
Okay, let's move on to the purpose of this meeting, supposedly on the surface there, Frederick Peterson, and this was this Saudi-Iraqi Coordination Council that Tillerson attended. This is what the name of this get-together was there. And this, in particular, its goal was to, A, deepen ties between Saudi Arabia and Iraq, and then the one that is a big question mark, which I am going to propose in form of a question to you, and that is to stop Iranian influence in the region. How is it that this is being displayed in a way that Iran is exerting its influence? Do you think Iran is exerting its influence, as in trying to get pressuring governments to come and comply with Iran? Because this is something that many are disagreeing with, and I'm wondering what your take is there on what they call the so-called Iranian influence, even though Iran does wield a lot of influence in the region.
I think we would have to be cosmically naive to think that neither Iran nor Saudi nor the United States nor other countries that are active within the region have interests that are entirely Iraq. The interests that they have flow beyond the borders, and they are competing. Some are healthy. They have an independent character. They must be controlled. I will quite agree with the assessment that the influence, the invitation for a growing influence of Saudi in the area is a dangerous and a very difficult ball to balance. However, it is seen by the Secretary and by the President that this is a counterweight to, yes, sir?
Can you please tell us why you say it's dangerous?
Why do I say it's dangerous? Because there is a flow beyond the borders of Saudi Arabia of its influence and an ambition to be the major competitor within that region. They have other competitors within that region, Iran being the primary, and trying to balance the two without trying to avoid war. Once again, the long war and the terrible troubles that have taken place in the country of Iraq is a very difficult ball to balance, shall we say. But it must be done. It must be done in order to avoid a larger conflict, or to avoid one or the other to gain a regional hegemony, which then will spill beyond those borders and become destabilizing to the region and ultimately to the world.
Well, okay, Saddam Abu Talib, I'm going to say the same question to you, and I'd like to ask from you, why is it that it is magnified in such a way? Because it's one thing when they put out their Iranian influence, but it's another thing for Iran to get along with its neighbors, to do business with its neighbors, and in the case of Iraq, to fight against the terrorists, of which it has been obviously very successful at.
Well, I think, traveling through the area from the Emirates to Oman, to Qatar, to Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, I'm very happy to see that there is an excellent commercial relationship and economic relationship between Iran and the Gulf states. And we don't see any problems between those countries, those group of countries and Iran. And as a matter of fact, we see an excellent cooperation. Maybe I am being pessimistic to say that the only country that is unhappy with such Arab-Iranian relationship is Israel. Israel definitely would lose a lot if there was an Islamic unity or kind of cooperation, an Islamic open market, or a united, active a form of cooperation between the Islamic countries. We should not forget the presence of Turkey as a very influential state within the Middle Eastern equation. So Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Iraq, Egypt, if there were such a united cooperation or an economic cooperation or military or political wait, I'm sure that Israelis will feel very insecure.
Okay.
The Israelis managed to diffuse any kind of closeness between Iran and any of the Arab states.
Okay, I got 30 seconds to ask you the same question. If you can't, 30 seconds for you to respond to it. Do you think, Frederick Peterson, that finally the notion of partitioning Iraq has failed?
I think that is a question that will continue, unfortunately. I shouldn't say unfortunately, because there are arguments that a division is a natural ethnic and religious association of different regions that would reduce rather than enhance.
Okay. Got to go to Asad Abu Talib. I'm sorry. Asad Abu Talib, same question to you. 30 seconds. Sorry,
yes,
sorry,
sir.
Frederick Peterson. Go ahead. Asad Abu Talib.
No, definitely this is the end. Mr. Barzani committed an atrocious mistake by doing his referendum, because he killed the Kurdish dream for the next 20 years.
Thank you, Asad Abu Talib from the State of the Law Coalition from Baghdad. And thank you, Frederick Peterson, Congressional Defense Policy Advisor, spoke to us from New York. Thanks for tuning in to another edition of The Debate. From me, Kaveh Taweh, and the entire team in the capital, Tehran. It's goodbye.